Well, today marks International Anti-Corruption Day, and it's a day commemorated annually on the 9th of December in recognition of the UN's 2003 Convention Against Corruption. Now, the day is meant to provide an opportunity to leaders and governments to join forces to effectively fight against the global problem that is corruption and fraud. And this year, to mark the day, the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation will host an event in which it will launch an international campaign to bring back to South Africa the Gupta family to answer to numerous claims of state capture against them. So to talk to us more about this, we're joined by Nishan Bolton, who is the Executive Director of the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. Nishan, good to speak to you. Good morning.
Good morning and greetings to you and your viewers.
If we could perhaps just start out by looking at the significance of a day such as today, International Anti-Corruption Day, and especially its significance in a country like South Africa, where corruption has become endemic. And even as we speak, I was just reading through some of the wires, the SIU now going after some people in Limpopo for irregularly awarded PPE tenders. So what is the significance of a day like today?
It's of huge significance. Corruption across the world threatens the very fabric of democracy. It has ruined millions, if not billions, of people's lives. It has weakened government. It has increased distrust in government across the world. And when that distrust is at such levels as we've seen in South Africa, people then begin to find alternative ways of expressing their political views, and not within the democratic system. And you've seen some of that in July in this country, and you've seen it in the US in terms of what happened there in January of this year, and in India and other parts of the world where corruption is rampant. People then find other ways of taking on the system, and in that process weaken democracy even further. But democracy also corruption also destroys economies. It weakens investment. It weakens the private sector's appetite for investment in particular countries. And the long and the short of it, it has a huge impact on unemployment and poverty and hunger. And therefore, a day like this across the world should be not merely talk shops, but should have been days in which we see billions of people out onto the streets, being educated, being mobilized against corruption. Unfortunately, COVID has prevented that from happening in South Africa. Otherwise, I am sure that there were initiatives to, in fact, march and mobilize thousands of people to express the kind of anger that is latent in this country around the issue of corruption and state capture.
And I was going to ask you whether initiatives like these actually work, Nishan, in light of the issue that you just mentioned, where the corruption just seems to carry on unabated, even now in South Africa as we speak. Because if you've been listening to the murmurs of late, people are starting to talk about South Africa becoming a failed state if we do not arrest the scourge of corruption in this country.
No, which is why I think we must never give up hope. We must never not believe that any action against corruption is not required. Because the moment we do that, the only people who benefit are the thieves and the crooks who would thrive off a society that is angry but does nothing about the corruption that is visible in terms of its effects on their lives. Therefore, that kind of speaking out and all kinds of agitation and action must be continued. We can never get to a point where we believe that action will not have benefits, even if it's not beneficial immediately.
So today we're also going to talk about a campaign by the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation to return the Guptas to South Africa. This, of course, for law enforcement agencies to actually move forward with this process, because it seems that they're not making any headway in this regard at the moment. But what's going to be different about your campaign in order to achieve what it seems like law enforcement hasn't been able to achieve?
Well, what this campaign seeks to do is to complement, hopefully, what government has been doing. And let me first say, we're not too sure what the status is of government's actions in terms of the extradition treaties and processes. We've heard contradictory stories in Parliament in the last couple of weeks. Whether or not the Guptas are on the Interpol red list is also a big issue. And therefore, a big part of this campaign, although it's international, is also about the kinds of necessary pressure and collaboration with the South African government and its agencies to speed up the processes which they have committed themselves to publicly. But to complement that work, we have partnered with organizations in the US, in the UK, and hopefully with some in the UAE in the very near future. And the objective here is to get international organizations, civil society, to lobby their legislators, their crime-fighting institutions, anti-corruption institutions, to do what was done in America around the McGinsey Act, which resulted in sanctions being placed on the Gupta families and their businesses in the US. There's been similar kinds of initiatives in the UK, because whilst this family has relocated ostensibly to Dubai, their business empire has in fact grown. They have continued businesses in other parts of the world, and all of that built most likely with the money that was taken out from South Africa. They've now grown an international business empire. Therefore, we think as a minimum, I think the countries where they operate need to be aware of who they are and how they've come to be in those countries, and just what kind of devastation they've caused in South Africa as well. And we think a combination of that kind of exposure, pressure from foreign governments, from civil society structures, will assist in the kind of call that we're making for them to return and to stand trial. They are currently on the charge sheet for the cases that are on the court roll in the Free State. And I'm sure that the Zondo Commission's report, which will be given to the President on the 1st of January, will make significant findings against this family. And that is all the more reason why they need to be brought back to this country.
And speaking of the Zondo Commission, if we look at what has flowed from there in terms of prosecutorial action to date, so are you satisfied as the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation of how our law enforcement entities have gone about dealing with some of the information that was ventilated before the Commission?
Well, firstly, I think there was an important change in terms of the legislation, which enabled the NPA to use the evidence presented at the Zondo Commission to build its own case. It's not automatic that the information presented at Zondo could have been used previously. This now means that the NPA could in fact use it without having to repeat much of the work that would have gone into that. But they have to still do their own work. They have to still present their own case. And we understand that takes time. So I think we would only be able to make a more definitive call on this after the Commission's report is published. And we would then be able to see how much of that the NPA has in fact taken up. And that would be, I think, a more useful basis to answer your question. At this point, we've seen bits and pieces of it, but not sufficient.
Well, fair enough in terms of the broader report. But if you just take, for example, Angelo Agrisi, appears before the commission and there's action. You know, he's in court at the moment, albeit that he fell ill. You take someone like Vincent Smith, also already before the courts as a result of some of the information that came to light. But what about others who were also implicated at this particular commission, but seemingly there are no repercussions, at least at the moment? Do you not think that our authorities, the NPA and all the other attendant entities that need to assist in the investigation and prosecution of individuals, do you think that they've done enough? Or is it fair for those who believe that a lot of this is politically motivated to hold that point of view?
Now, I'm not sure about it being politically motivated. I think we are all aware of the kind of weaknesses in the NPA, its claims of that capacity. In fact, there might well be many within the NPA who don't share the vision of the current administration and who have perhaps acted as obstacles themselves. For us, I think the fact that there was some movement on some issues is an indication that of the possibilities of usage of the testimony at the Zondo Commission by the NPA. And the fact that it has been done in the cases that you have cited, I think is an indication just of how it can be used and most likely will be used, and most likely once the Commission's report has also been published as well. I think the NPA and its functioning is critical for the prosecution of the Guptas in particular, and I can only hope that they have now built a case beyond the one that is on the court roll in the Free State.
Well, given what we've heard from the NPA over the last week or so, what came out of Parliament yesterday, are you confident? Because one of the questions that I've asked previously is about Marcus Uestad Steinhoff, for example, where all the evidence is there, and it is clear that when it comes to these complex cases where people are able to afford the best legal representation, it seems as though the NPA is just not up to the task.
No, I don't think that they would be up to the task at this point in time. I think for anybody to expect them to be able to have the kind of full arsenal of skills and the range of competent people, the NPA would probably need a much, much bigger budget. But more than that, would have to have the best prosecutorial brains in the country. And I think they have been trying to build that capacity. Having worked in the public service, just pulling together competent teams to deal with the kind of work that they are doing is not stuff that happens overnight. But having said that, I think there is a genuine expectation and a legitimate expectation that more should have been done. And I think that expectation will intensify once the report has been published, because the report will most likely go into details around specific people, specific entities, both in the public and private sector. And that would give us, I think, a full index of the kinds of people that we would expect the NPA to be acting against. And when there is no action in terms of the outcomes of the report, I think we would better be able to answer the questions that you are posing at this point in time.
And what about corruption more generally speaking at this stage in South Africa? We saw with the PPE corruption scandals, I mean, again, we're talking about hundreds of billions of rands that are just disappearing. You look at the SRD grant and again, corruption there, a lot of it by state officials as well. What should be done about this?
I've listened to Advocate Mothibe, very encouraged by the work that he has been doing in his unit. at least you're beginning to see some movement there. The freezing of assets, and I think a number of people that have appeared. Again, not sufficient, given the scale of the PPE corruption in particular. I think what needs to happen is we need to also talk beyond prosecution and beyond the work of the NPA and prosecuting authorities. What is it that needs to be done in terms of our legislation? What is it also that needs to be done in terms of accountability of the politicians who held oversight roles over PPE in particular? And I think here you've seen some sanction of the former health minister. And again, one can only express the hope that the digital vibes issue will become an example of the kinds of independent prosecution that will be required in this country. I think the last point is, what bothers me most is the issue of public sanction. There are people implicated in corruption, but they attend all kinds of public events and functions and are treated almost like celebrities wherever they go, as if what they have done is equivalent to that of being Robin Hoods in this country, when that is in fact far from the case. And I think when society begins to socially ostracize and isolate those who have been found to be guilty or implicated in corruption, as many of these have been, then I think we would find we would begin to reduce the scale of corruption that has plagued this country so far. It has just become too normal and too acceptable, both by society and by many in political circles.
And you point to society, and rightly so, but what about political parties as an example? They are not ostracizing those within their ranks. They're supposed to provide leadership, one would expect, in society. They're not doing it. Society is looking at their leaders and saying, if they're not doing anything, why should we?
I think you're absolutely right. Political parties have to be the most exemplary on this. But we know that a lot of our politics has been bedeviled by money, and that the sources of much of that money has come from corruption in the first place, and that is where the Party Funding Act was meant to have put a lid on some of these things. But you've seen very poor declarations of party funding sources. But again, that legislation is progressive. It needs to be strengthened. Our entire political system needs to be overhauled to reduce the kinds of impact on corruption on our politics.
Well, Nishan, we'll leave it there for today. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Nishan Bolton is the Executive Director of the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. And, of course, we are today marking International Anti-Corruption Day. And the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation indicating that they will be spearheading a campaign to try and bring back the Gupta family so that they can stand trial for the monies that were siphoned out of this country. So we'll keep an eye on that. And of course, I see many of your messages coming through regarding corruption. Masande asking about the professors from the University of Johannesburg who stole 25 million rand. What happened to them? This one by SA says the Auditor General's latest report of 166 billion rand in irregular expenditure, just the tip of the iceberg. What's happening here? Pointing to continued corruption within our state service. So all of that we see, and we thank you for sending us those messages.